Good morning, colleagues. Welcome to the meeting on APMEN Vivax Working Group virtual updates. I'm the leader of APMEN Vivax Working Group and shall speak you through the objectives and structure of two-day virtual meeting, for which the theme is emerging evidences and experiences. APMEN Vivax Group tries to address knowledge gaps, research priorities, and also share experiences with partners related to Vivax malaria. And accordingly, the objectives of the meeting are, can you have objective slide, please? To explore the latest on Vivax malaria research and development related to diagnosis and treatment, and also update on the implementation of APMEN Vivax Group working group activities, as well as new malaria tools and health systems. You will agree with me that most of important limitation for safe radical cure is for Vivax malaria is G6PD testing at point of care. Although WHO recommends testing before primaquine treatment is given as a best practice, but it is often not feasible in most countries, as you will hear from the speakers during the presentations. And therefore, many countries, prefer to give low dose of primaquine over a longer period, avoid the risks due to primaquine, and also some countries try to monitor for the side effects. But this system is not absolutely safe. The other challenge is the detection of reservoir of infection or the presence of hypnozoites in population and hypnozoites which lead to relapses later on, and for which the attempts have been made to use the serological testing, and we will hear from the speakers about that and the experiences. And now that we have new tools for diagnosis as well as single dose cure, a number of studies have been done for these. So our agenda includes all these aspects. So can you move to the agenda, please? So on day one, we will be covering the G6PD diagnosis and also the serological testing to guide the treatment for so-called hidden reservoir. And in the next session on treatment series, next slide, please. And in this treatment series, we will include the treatment, the updates on the tafenoquine from MMV and MORU as well, and which is the new single dose cure for relapsing malaria. And also a number of studies have been done now on radical cure using different regimens of primaquine, and especially the short course regimen where we use high daily dose of primaquine. Those studies will also be presented, and there will be also presentation on the universal radical cure. On the second day, next slide, please. On the second day, we will be talking about and giving the updates on the Vivax working group activities, including the progress towards Vivax elimination in Pakistan, as well as training activities, which is, of course, a national program priority. And the next session will have health systems impacting malaria, and this will include issues related to the pool procurement mechanisms and community-led initiatives for Vivax malaria, and also the issues related to vigilance systems when we talk in the public health program, when we are talking about the radical cure. So as you can see, we have a packed program for 2 hours each day and expect active participation from all of you. And before we start the technical program, I would like to introduce my colleagues from APMEN Vivax Working Group who have really worked hard to organize this event. Dr. Caroline Lage is co-chair of Vivax Working Group and MMV Regional Advisor covering GMS, Indonesia and PNG. And we have Dr. Manas Shrestha, who is Technical Coordinator of Vivax Working Group. And we also have with us Dr. Phone Sihan, who is Associate Director of APMEN. Now, friends, just a few housekeeping announcements. Just keep your microphones off, of course, when you are not speaking. And let us now pose for a picture And for this, please switch on your videos, and I suggest that you can keep your videos on for better engagement during the presentations. And after this group video, I request Dr. Caroline to take over for the next session. Thank you. Over. Please switch on the videos, everyone.
Thanks, Dr. Nina. Dr. Pone, can you let us know when the photo is captured?
Yeah. Could you please video on? So.
It's nice to see a lot of familiar faces. Hello to everybody. Dr. Pone, are you going to give us a 1, 2, 3 smile?
Okay. So 1, 2, 3, smile.
Thank you.
Just a moment. But there's 2 pages. So I need to screenshot. Yes, I finished.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Carrie Lynch, as Dr. Nina said. I'm the Regional Advisor for MMB and co-chair alongside Nina. And we're going to move on to the diagnostics section, the diagnosis section. This is starting with Dr. Ankana Sejang. This is a video. So you have to be a little bit, maybe turn your volume up a little bit on this. But Dr. Sejang is a diagnostics and laboratory expert. She previously headed the National DVBD laboratories in Nonthaburi, Thailand for the Ministry of Public Health here. Dr. Ankana has extensive experience in malaria research and phenomenal experience in both diagnostics and specifically on G6PD testing. So following is a video from Dr. Ankana, and I know that a lot of you have experience rolling out G6PD in routine health systems across the region. So please, if you have any questions or comments to add, please either write them in the text box or get ready to ask those at the end of the session when Dr. Nina will take the Q&A. So Dr. Pone, if you could put on the video, please. I'm not hearing sound, Dr. Pone.
There. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Ankana Sejang from the Office of Disease Prevention and Control, Chiang Mai, Department of Disease Control, Thailand. Today, I'm going to talk about integration with CPD analysis to patient pathways, experiences, and learning from Thailand. The presentation composed of data with imaging to CPD, results, challenges, and conclusions. As we all know that the increasing proportion of Vivax is here, and the difficulty in the lack of skill of these parasite species, the Vivax patients with the G6PD deficiency have high risk of pyroxine-induced hemolysis. Therefore, G6PD testing is needed to classify the dose of pyroxine, qualitative screening, such as a full-effect spot test has been used, but it's difficult to identify G6PD intermediate or normal in females. Implementing of discipline in Thailand. Thailand has implemented discipline for malaria patients since 2015 with the care start discipline. This test is very simple to use, but the problem of using care start discipline was error in the interpretation of the result because of the high humidity and high temperature. In 2017, a modified fluorescence spot test was developed and implemented in the three provinces in the northern Thailand, Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, and Mae Hong. Because of in this province, there was IDS pilot project, and the IDS project was very successful, and the project has become a national policy. But with the modified fluorescence spot test, it's difficult to expand to the older region due to the reagent itself has a short half-life, and it needs staff at the regional level to prepare and do quality control in their own region. So in 2019, the Division of Vector-borne Disease has a quantitative PCPD biosensor and implement this test in Thailand and set up PCPD training for malaria staff and hospitals in the high endemic area. The quantitative PCPD test is the biosensor. It is a point of care which can be used in almost all health facilities, and this test measures the amount of PCPD activity in patient blood. The result will take only about 2 minutes. Blood sample can be either from the fingerprint or venous blood. The interpretation of PCPD biosensor divided into male and female by using the PCPD activity level. If the PCPD activity level is lower than 3.1, both male and female is classified as a PCPD deficiency. But if PCPD activity is from 4.1 or above, in male is classified as a normal. But with the female from 4.1 to 6.0, unit hemoglobin is for female classified as partial or intermediate, and the female must have the PCPD activity start from 6.1 or above, will be classified as a normal. So in the national guideline treatment in Thailand from 2021 until present, we divided into one is for medical doctor and another one is for public health officer. For complicated malaria patients, only medical doctor can do treatment, but complicated malaria cannot be treated with the public health officer or has to refer to the hospital only. So what I would like to show here is for uncomplicated malaria with the transparent, for the same with medical doctor and public health officer will give medicine with cephalosporin and single-dose thymoxine. But with Vivax, it needs the PCPD test, but For normal CCTV, or the patient will be both the medical doctor and public health officer will give a 3-day chloroquine and 14 days chloroquine. But in the patient who have health facility has no CCTV test available, so no CCTV test. They use the history. They use of history of the patient. If they have the hemolysis, they will classify as deficiency and go to the hospital. But if they don't have history of a CCTV deficiency, they appear as a normal. They will give a 3-day chloroquine, 14-day chloroquine, and health education to observe their hemolysis. If they have the hemolysis during the symptom during take the chloroquine, and for CCTV deficiency or intermediate CCTV or partial deficiency, or the patient will refer to the hospital, and only medical doctor will give chloroquine and 8-week chloroquine. And this is the forecast of integrated drug efficacy surveillance system. As I mentioned that we have a pilot project in Thailand since 2017. And with the first one, we have the follow-up on day 3, day 7, day 28, and 42 with the Vivax. We will follow up at 40, 28, 60, and 90. And for the CCTV that we integrated, we put in this project is on day 0. At day 0, all the patient has to be tested with the CCTV either by fluorescent spot test or as right now we have biosensor. And this is another workflow for malaria patients at malaria clinics and hospitals with the CCTV test available in our research that finished. It's called APMEN project that's in our region. And as you see here, we found that in the hospital there are many people involved for malaria treatment, diagnosis, like start from in the hospital, they have nurse, they have medical doctor, they have a lab technician and pharmacist to do all their tasks. Like they do different tasks for one patient. Medical doctor will give a treatment, will ask and then send a request form to the laboratory for diagnose malaria by microscope or RDT, and for the fluorescent spot test, for CCTV test, or for biosensor depending on the doctor. So lab technicians just do what the medical doctor says. And pharmacist will give the medicine as the doctor, medical doctor, all this. But at the malaria clinic, we have one stop service by microscopists, which do all the tasks from registration until diagnose and do diagnose for malaria and screening test for CCTV and give the treatment follow the national guidelines for uncomplicated malaria and also CCTV, normal CCTV only. So the challenge of our CCTV testing in Thailand, as you see that we need to increase the percentage of CCTV of malaria patients as CCTV tested before that. administration. And most of the TCPD tests usually have a short half-life and require low temperature for storage. Therefore, the reagent will be expired, particularly in the low transmission malaria. And also, we have to strengthen the quality assurance of TCPD testing, like cold chain, transportation, storage, and also the performance of the person who use the test. And also we have to increase patient awareness. Actually, we have to increase the doctor awareness as well in the hospital to request for this testing when he or she request for malaria diagnosis. But in our region, we found that when we have a TCPD implement, the patient asks for TCPD testing when they have diagnosed as a malaria, and also they observe the side effects and symptoms of the tuberculosis. But that's only in the north. We hope that this will be increased in the whole country. In conclusion, TCPD testing is important for the treatment vaccination for safety. At present, not all health facilities have TCPD testing, and we have to strengthen the quality assurance for TCPD testing and reduce more research on the treatment of virus staging and TCPD deficiency, and also more research on developing quantitative TCPD for all health facilities. This must be with a fairly simple use and quality control is not difficult, and also the price of the cases. Thank you for your attention.
Fantastic. Thank you, and thank you all for your patience. I know that the sound quality wasn't the best, but I think that Dr. Ankana's message comes through. It can be quite complex to introduce a new diagnostic into the patient pathway, and that could be different at different levels of the health system. So as we share experiences and I guess lessons in different countries, I think that this can improve as time goes on with countries and get a lot easier. I'm going to move on now to the next presenter, which is Professor Leanne Robinson, who we're very honoured to have with us today. Professor Leanne is an NHMRC Leadership Fellow. She's the Director of Health Security and Pandemic Preparedness Programme and Head of Vector-Borne Diseases and Tropical Public Health Working Group at the Burnet Institute in Australia. She's an epidemiologist and an expert in vector-borne diseases research, specifically in the areas of malaria and Vivax epidemiology, surveillance, interventional trials, and implementation research. She leads a highly collaborative, interdisciplinary and translational research program with strong links to disease control programs addressing priority gaps in surveillance, control, and elimination of malaria. And today, Serology Partnership. This is a new diagnostic tool coming on stream that I think a lot of national programs will be interested in, especially as they're moving towards lower caseloads. So with that, I'll hand over to Leanne. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Carrie, for the invitation to present on behalf of VISPA, the Vivax Serology Partnership, which really aims to bring together academic researchers, control program managers, and diagnostic test developers to facilitate the use of P-Vivax serology as a tool for identifying and treating hypnozoite carriers to accelerate towards malaria elimination. And this is critical because, like Carrie just said, and as I think all of us in this meeting know, the persistence of Vivax currently challenges malaria elimination efforts and the 2030 regional malaria elimination targets. And implementation of effective radical cure has been hindered for decades by those challenges of G6PD testing that we just heard about and the 14-day low-dose Primaquine treatment courses, But we now have new G6PD diagnostics, shorter primaquine regimes, single-dose tafenoquine, and all of these really provide an excellent opportunity to accelerate the implementation of effective P-Vivax case management. But what they don't address is that remaining challenge of targeting anti-hypnozoite therapy towards all P-Vivax infections, including the clinically silent hypnozoite reservoir, the individuals that don't present with symptomatic clinical cases and receive radical cure, but do drive the chronic burden of disease that sustains Vivax transmission. So new diagnostics are needed to specifically detect people with hidden Vivax hypnozoites. And the approach that we're taking with VISPA is to do this through serology, and P-Vivax serological testing and treatment, or PV serotat as we call it, is a potential strategy that could really fill this current gap in the Vivax toolkit and support acceleration towards malaria elimination. And so our approach is to use serology as an indirect marker of hypnozoites. So P-Vivax specific antibodies can inform on both current and past.
I think we've just lost sound. Leanne, can you hear us? You can? I'm lip reading you at this stage, but I can't hear you. Just checking, Dr. Nina Manash, can you hear?
No,
Yeah,
no, we
okay.
can't hear.
Yeah, I think you've frozen, so we're going to give you a couple of seconds to come back. I think she might be leaving and rejoining.
Yeah.
These are the joys of virtual meetings, hey?
Pros and cons are there.
This is it. So just as Leanne is getting back online, if anyone's got any experiences to share from the G6PD implementation as to Dr. Ankana's presentation in their countries, please put it in the Q&A or the chat. And if you've got questions for Professor Leanne, please also put it in the Q&A or the chat, or you can ask questions directly after in the Q&A session. Yeah, I'm just checking if you're back online yet.
So I am.
There we go.
Can you see me and hear me?
I can hear you. I can hear you. I think that's probably the most important.
Okay.
And see you as well, yeah.
Okay,
great.
I'm so sorry. I have no idea what happened. I just froze and got kicked off. Let's try
It's
again.
the gremlins.
Apologies.
Great, no worries.
I believe we were up to here. Is this right? Can someone
that's correct?
confirm?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think what I was trying to say is that to this end, a novel validated panel of markers has been developed and established at WEHI, and in collaboration with many country partners has been demonstrated to correctly classify individuals as exposed to P-Vivax in the previous 9 months or not, with 80% sensitivity and specificity, to identify individuals at increased risk of recurrent infections in endemic cohorts from Brazil, Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea, and to identify individuals who experience P-Vivax relapses after being in an endemic area with a sensitivity of 74% and a specificity of 94%. And with such an approach, we really have the potential to overcome the challenges that are associated with ideas like mass drug administration or MSAT as ways of targeting the hypnozoite reservoir. And the rationale for PV serotat is really nicely illustrated by this schematic that Michael White prepared, which assumes that in a population exposed to Vivax with a PCR prevalence of blood stage parasites, shown by this little marker of 12%, there's a hypnozoite burden of about 30%, shown in yellow. And if we provide this population with mass drug administration with safe and effective radical cure, then yes, we achieve 100% effective treatment, but we also overtreat 70% of the population, potentially exposing them to an aminoglycinine that they just didn't need. On the other hand, if we conduct a mass screen and treat with a diagnostic that detects 80% of these blood stage infections, Then we treat them with radical cure. We haven't unnecessarily treated anyone, but we've only treated 33% of hypnozoite carriers, and that's not going to have the impact on accelerating towards Vivax elimination that we're really after. And so to achieve a better balance of targeting hypnozoites whilst minimising overtreatment, this is where we feel that Vivax serological test and treatment has a role. With a test that has 80% sensitivity and 80% specificity, then we have the ability to detect at least 80% of these hypnozoite carriers, give them safe and effective radical cure, achieving 80% effective treatment with only 20% overtreatment. So by targeting effective radical cure towards hypnozoite carriers detected on the basis of their recent exposure to Vivax infections through serology, we maximize effective treatment whilst minimizing the overtreatment associated with MDA. And it's really, for this reason and through a lot of consultation and discussion that WHO also saw this as an area of unmet need and has supported and is about to approve a P-Vivax risk of relapse use cases and preferred product characteristics document, the draft of which was open for public consultation until the end of August. It outlines 2 priority use cases. One is the one I really just talked about, which is using a test that can diagnose relapse risk to directly guide radical cure treatment in an individual. The second is population-based screening, using a test or an assay that can detect recent Vivax infections or hypnozoite carriage for programmatic applications. It also outlines 2 preferred product characteristics to guide diagnostic manufacturers in the development of such tests. One to be a point of contact or care test to enable that immediate treatment of somebody who is positive for being at risk of a relapse. The second, a laboratory-based test for that population level screening. And now I'm going to briefly dive into these use cases in more detail, really just in order to promote that thinking and conversation that Carrie mentioned about what might be the appropriate settings to consider exploring these different use cases of a test like this, and in particular, in our case, serology in. So use case 1A is really the PV hypno test and treat use case, the one I just talked about. So it's most relevant to NMCPs engaged in Vivax elimination. It focuses on the detection and treatment of individuals with hypnozoites, sequestered infections, or recent P-Vivax infections. And it's envisaged that this test result would prompt G6PD testing and radical cure treatment as per the policy of the country that it's implemented in, that the operational unit would be at the village, district, or in some sort of defined area or at-risk population, and that the transmission level would probably be low to approaching 0 for such a sort of intensive intervention. It's envisaged that this would require the point of contact version of the test, ideally, to enable that immediate treatment. And there's currently no real alternative to this except for MDA that we spoke about. And I guess it's envisaged, but what, conversations with everyone here would be great for is that a test detecting relapse risk could really be used in proactive public health campaign style programs, similar to the kind of NTD, MDA programs that happen in some countries. But in this case, where entire communities are screened and then the positives are immediately treated with safe and effective radical cure. Alternatively, in countries where reactive case detection might be a program already ongoing, you could envisage this being added to that for reactive screening and treatment of family members or neighbours of confirmed cases. Use case 1B is about improving acute case management and giving radical cure for P-Vivax relapse prevention in clinical cases of P. falciparum. We know that in co-endemic areas, people presenting with P. falciparum cases have a high risk of harbouring hypnozoites and subsequently relapsing with Vivax. So the idea here is that, having this test as well would prompt treatment with radical cure. This would be at the individual level, could be integrated into existing, could somebody go on mute, please. It could be integrated into existing case management structures within countries, and therefore potentially be implemented in moderate to approaching zero transmission levels. Again, would ideally have that point of contact test. In terms of alternatives, the alternative to this really is universal radical cure for all malaria clinical episodes. And I know we're going to hear more about that from Kamala, and that really is an alternative approach that could achieve the same thing of improving acute case management to direct radical cure towards hypnozoite carriers. Use case 1C is around prevention of reintroduction by screening travellers or migrants for hypnozoite carriage and risk of relapse. It's most relevant for areas that have successfully eliminated malaria but remain susceptible to risk of reintroduction. Given the high proportion, of silent Vivax carriers, as people move across borders, it's very difficult with a standard diagnostic test. The idea here is that a test like this could be used to again guide G6PD testing and radical cure at the individual level, at border crossings or refugee camps, and in post-elimination or settings that are maintaining elimination, and would again benefit from the point of contact test. Moving on to use case 2, and I've combined 2A and 2B here because they're very similar really, which is using a test or assay that can again predict people that are harbouring hypnozoites at risk of relapse, but in this case for risk stratification to enable subsequent targeting of interventions. And they could be interventions like the 3 that we just talked about, in use case 1, or also to apply it for monitoring and evaluation of control and elimination programs. So, clearly for use case 2A and 2B, it's not necessarily envisaged that this needs a point of contact test, and is really something that could be done with a laboratory-based test, including, the existing Luminex test that has been developed at WeHi. The benefit of such an approach, is that it would overcome the issue we currently have with infection metrics that underestimate that true burden of infection, and would allow a population prevalence estimate of the total burden, and would potentially also enable, future M&E efforts to have smaller sample sizes, lower cost, as well as that more robust estimate of impact. But where I want to focus in my remaining minutes is that now that these 5 use cases that I've just been through, and again, I urge you to take a look at the draft document, and the final one should be released soon. But now that these 5 use cases and the 2 PPCs are finalised, a priority for VISPA, and in particular the policy and implementation pillar that I lead, is to engage deeply with many of you on this call to really understand the priorities at a country level, the need for an additional tool like this or not, and possible pathways to implementation. So we would be really very keen to work in partnership with you and your teams to undertake some deeper consultations and interviews to understand which use cases could be a priority in different transmission settings, to get a handle on both real and perceived barriers to using serology to guide treatment, because I think there is a little bit to unpack there at both an individual and then population level. To be able to really co-develop roadmaps, understand health system readiness in different settings, acceptability, both from a population, but also health worker and health system perspective, and really be able to outline what are the evidence requirements in each setting that would really need to be met to kind of help progress policy and implementation of a tool like this. In particular, we'd be keen to be able to map the feasibility of enabling intervention. So other activities that are happening in your setting where you see serology might be this really useful additional add-on, again, either at a population level or in elimination settings, where there might be focal MDA or reactive case detection, whether or not there's an opportunity to align and add on there. We would also really like to work with all of you to develop a highly collaborative and coordinated program of implementation research for each use case across different settings. So we have some feasibility studies and cluster randomized trials that are either ongoing or planned in several settings, particularly for this first use case. But we know that different use cases will be more or less of a priority in different settings. And as you can see here, there are many areas where there are opportunities for us to work together to start generating the evidence that you think will be most relevant for your setting. And we're really very eager to support you and your teams to explore this. Across this program of trials and implementation research studies, we would also really like to embed community and health systems acceptability studies to evaluate what sort of training requirements there would be for these tests at different levels of the health system, and ultimately to really integrate the evidence both from the stakeholder consultations and this research program into an implementation toolkit that could then really support programs to consider and apply how to best move ahead with integrating serology and PV serotat into their program. So with that, I would like to thank everybody who's involved in the VISPA consortium currently. And this is led by Ivo Mueller and Chris Drakely, but it includes many, many partners who are leading important components of this work in different countries and different settings, both tool development, as well as the trials and the implementation research. And importantly, we'd really like it to include more people. We would really like to encourage engagement in VISPA, because I think it's only by working together, by understanding what you think will work within elimination settings, that we can progress towards potentially using this as a tool to accelerate Vivax elimination. So if you're interested in knowing more or being involved in stakeholder consultations or implementation research projects, please scan this QR code. There's just a couple of really short questions and some details, or feel free to reach out to us at any time at vispa@wehi.edu.au or via Carrie and Minash if there's anything more that you'd like to know about how you might be able to get involved. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thanks a million, Lian. Now, I'm going to call on Dr. Tang from Vietnam. We wanted to get the perspective, as Lian was saying, they want to build up a consortium and a collaboration with national programs and stakeholders around this new tool. So Dr. Tang, I was just going to ask about the Vietnam program's thoughts on serotat and feasibility of its use and how it might be integrated into the activities that you do, given that you're so close to elimination now.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Caroline, and also thank you so much, Professor Lynn Robinson, for very nice and informative presentations. So we can understand after the presentation that serotat is a promising new approach to malaria control, and that has potential to make a significant impact on global malaria burden. And we understand that serotat can be used for improve the effectiveness of malaria control program by targeting treatment to people who are more at risk for relapse, and it helps to reduce the number of malaria cases, and especially to have eliminate malaria in our country and also the other country with Vivax burdens. So I think it's very meaningful for us to use serotat, and I think that is really alternative solution for us in order to eliminate malaria. But I still have some concern. I have some question. Maybe Professor Robinson can talk for us more about serotat. More or less already get PQ from WHO. And how about the growth reaction with antibody to as a malaria parasite such as falciparum. And in order to implement in Vietnam, in my countries, I also curious about the cost, about ease of use, how to use it, is it easy, and also process for approval and registration. So maybe Professor Robinson can talk more about that. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks a million, Dr. Tang. And I guess with that, you've opened up the Q&A. So I'll hand over to Nina, and I guess Leanne can come back on some of those questions from Dr. Tang. So Nina, over to you for the Q&A.
Thank you, Kerry. Yeah, I mean, really great presentations. And, I don't know whether Dr. Onkana is online or it was a recorded presentation, isn't it, Kerry?
That's a recorded presentation, but we do have some responses from Dr. Benedict Lay to Prudence's question, and also we could call on perhaps Sonia Chung from CHAI for Prudence's question in the Q&A.
Okay, so if there are questions for Dr. Ankana, we can direct. So first, let us now, Dr. Tang has raised a very important and relevant questions for Dr. Leanne Robinson, and maybe we can start our Q&A sessions with that. And to all the participants, please raise your hand if you have a question, and then you identify yourself and the speaker, and then of course we had only two speakers here, so we can then handle your question. So first to Dr. Robinson for the questions raised by Dr. Tang.
Thanks so much, Dr. Tang, for those questions. They're really important. Where we're at the moment in terms of, the pathway towards having, a pre-qualified test and, some sort of, WHO guideline around, using a tool like this is at the very beginning. So most of the evidence, that you just asked about in terms of, ease of use in endemic countries and cost and cost effectiveness, they're the exact questions that we would really like to prioritize answering through the program of implementation research that we'd really love to plan and conduct with partners on this call. So where we're at the moment is with WHO, first of all, needing to confirm that there was an unmet need in this area for a test like this. And they have now proceeded with developing and are about to publish these use cases that I've talked about and the preferred product characteristics. So, simultaneously to that, many other people, both within VISPA Consortium as well as externally, are working to make improvements, to possible tests that could be used for this purpose. And so now we're really at the stage of generating the evidence whilst still developing better tests that could be used at point of contact or point of care. So the test that all the evidence has been generated on at the moment is a laboratory test. So the samples need to be collected, transferred to a laboratory, run on a high throughput Luminex platform, and then they can be used to either guide subsequent treatment or for that population level stratification. And this has all been done in research studies. Where we would like to get to is to know that once we have a point of contact test, something that can be used in the clinic or the field to enable that person to be immediately identified and then go on to have a G6PD test and effective radical cure, that we already have the evidence that this is an effective intervention, that this is feasible to implement, that this does address the needs of national malaria control programs. So we're really trying to work in a way where we can generate the evidence that's going to be needed locally for national programs as well as for WHO, whilst at the same time improving the tools to go from a laboratory assay to a point of care test. So I hope that answers one of your questions. And then the other question that I'll quickly address, and then I'm happy to answer any others or elaborate further, is around cross-reactivity. So Dr. Ria Longley at WeHi has done a lot of work in this area, exploring potential cross-reactivity of the down-selected Vivax antigens with other Plasmodium species. And this is not so much of a problem for P. falciparum, but she has also explored this for P. knowlesi, and there was a higher level of cross-reactivity to knowlesi. But they have done a program of work that enables them to optimize which antigens and the signal to those antigens that can also allow them to differentiate. So there's a nice paper that she has published with colleagues at Menzies and in Malaysia that I can share with someone who can post in the chat. And this talks about cross-reactivity, because you're right, it's a huge issue, right? If you're going to use this test, you need to know not only how sensitive it is for detecting these hypnozoite carriers, but also how specific it is, and are we going to be picking up others? So this is definitely an area that we're working on as well. But for now, the panel that's been optimized appear very, very specific for Vivax.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, although I could not see that, but I'm informed. Is there a question from Dr. Prudence for Dr. Ankana's presentation?
So perhaps I can read it out. Prudence was asking, would it be possible to have a patient register computerized with G6PD status on it? So repeat malaria patients could be looked up and would not need retesting, or you could put that on the patient's smartphone.
Okay. And maybe Dr. Sonia or Dr. Benedict can reply, although it is in the chat, I believe, but still if they would like to respond online.
I think I can paste, we asked Benedict Lay, who's an expert in this area, I can paste his response on. And I'd also ask, just in terms of the logistics and different challenges of implementation, Sonia Chung from Chai might be able to give us some insight from their experience.
Yeah, sure. So our team worked with mostly Cambodia and the national malaria program. So if anyone from the NMPs are here, they may be able to give more details. But from what we know from our teams, it would be great to have a register, but there are still some challenges and that need to be figured out. For example, even now although there are electronic patient records, there are still challenges in having patient IDs in general that can be used to link across different malaria episodes. And not all point of cares or BMWs might have stable internet all the time to save or retrieve these GCPD statuses. Specifically with the SD files and the GCPD test that are used now, we would expect some false GCPD deficient results. So it probably would make sense for the program to want to retest previously deficient patients. And some healthcare professionals are still not very confident about the G6PD results and may insist on retesting to ensure that G6PD is actually normal at the time of diagnosis of the malaria. So they might also want to retest previously normal patients anyway. And national treatment guidelines in, for example, Cambodia and Laos require health centers to check hemoglobin levels before initiating radical cure with permequin. So in the absence of very specific hemoglobin tests, for example, HemoQ, which is very expensive, it may actually make sense to use the SD biosensor G6PD test anyway to get some hemoglobin level to inform that. So those are things that come to mind right now, and maybe other people will have different thoughts as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Very important point. I mean, when the test is done, that is also relevant, immediately after malaria or in an anemic individual, the values can be different. Yeah, thank you. So I can see hands raised by Dr. Soy. I mean, would you like to ask the question? Dr. Soy Chi Kiang.
Yes, you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Good. Thank you very much, Nina, and thank Professor Robinson for the very interesting presentation. And yeah, I think as Dr. Thang already mentioned, in Vietnam now the numbers go down drastically, and proportion wise, Vivax is very high. Cambodia is more than 90% Vivax if you look at the data today, and so on. And I think the issue, and for Cambodia right now, we are at the stage of developing the prevention of reintroduction guideline. And then, when we develop that document, we also looking in terms of what we're going to do with Vivax. And Vivax is quite complex, as all, I think, speakers and already highlighted in terms of the current tool that we are looking at may need to think in terms of what else can bring to the table, and then can help in terms of to end this or interrupt the transmission, particularly at the community. And I think this is something that we just hear in terms of serology testing and treatment. And I think this is probably the we need to the country need to look at, and then probably more collaboration, work together in terms of document for the on this, and then in terms of how to translate it and how to execute it, operationalize at the country level. And I'm happy to hear Dr. Thang already asked in terms of the, and then Dr. Robinson, you already answered to that also, that this is still at the laboratory stage. It's not at the field implementation. I think that's something that a country would keen to collaborate further on this. And several points that I just want to see this, because the problem of Vivax is the transmission already happened when they, subclinical stage. They didn't really come to the health facility because they don't have symptoms and so on. And then in order to eliminate malaria, we have to find way to interrupt this further transmission. And the MDA been, or TDA or whatever the name, mass drug administration and so on, been deployed in some country. But seeing the result that presented by the Professor Robinson, this is we over-treated, which is unnecessarily, and then particularly with this 8-aminoquinoline, which is, we have to be very, very cautious and very careful in terms of the, the dangers of that drug, particularly for those at the community, we don't know the status of the P6PD, and particularly the deficient patient. And with this serology, it can bring the like a shifting in terms of 80% right treatment targeted based on the result of serology. But my question to the Dr. Robinson, because the response of the antibody may not be the same from one patient to another. Is it that still the serology can still surrogate to tell us about the history of infection and ultimately relapsing of the case? And in the context of high burden versus almost, eliminated, is it the role of that serology still equally everywhere the same, or we have to use this in the context specific for that? I think this is something that I would keen to hear more on that. And one thing that you also mentioned about the falciparum, and then for the time being, the national treatment guideline, if you identify falciparum, ACT plus single lodoprimacy, that is standardized. But now you mentioned that, oh, well, we need to also look at the PQ radical cure. although you don't have anything to confirm or to detect the PV in that area, because the active foci or the site of the falciparum may be ultimately Vivax can emerge.
Dr. Soy, thank you. I mean, for your perspective, I mean, really important points. Maybe we have to, and this is such a topic, I think there would be many questions. Even I had noted down one or two, but I think the time is running out, and we can have this, I mean, in-depth discussion on this, and definitely we need to learn more. And to one of the things which you pointed out, definitely it has to be context specific, as you know, Dr. Lian presented in the rationale. I mean, it cannot be applicable in every situation, and many countries have used, prophylaxis, mass-free prophylaxis treatment with primaquine, which obviously, as she explained, it won't be relevant. So, as I'm getting indications from organizers, we have to move to the next session. But just within a minute or two, if Dr. Robinson would like to respond. I mean, we don't have much time, just a short answer, and then we can move on to the next session.
Many thanks for the questions, and I agree there's so much to talk about this. A very, very short response would be that the current assay and test is optimized for low transmission settings, elimination settings. It would not perform as well. We know from data we have it does not perform as well in higher transmission settings at the moment. And the idea of the development is that we may be able to have a test that can operate across all settings, or we may be able to have algorithms that are country or region specific. So I'll leave it there, but really very happy to engage further offline. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that response. Yeah, that is very critical. Okay, so we can, I mean, the participants can have direct connection, and links have been given also in the chat box. They can be used. So with this, I hand over to Manash for the next session, please. You are mute, Manash.
Manash, you're muted.
Yeah, badly. Thank you so much, Dr. Nina and Dr. Carey, for the wonderful session on diagnosis. Now we'll move on to the next meeting objective, which is the treatment, radical cure. And to start off, we have Dr. Elodie from MMV, and she will be giving us the latest update on primaquine and tafenoquine from different parts of the world. To introduce Dr. Elodie, she is the Senior Director of Access and Product Management at MMV. She supports policy adoption, introduction, and use of new medicines for Vivax malaria in Asia, the Horn of Africa, and Latin America. Over to you, Dr. Elodie.
Thank you so much, Dr. Manash. Let me share my screen. Give me 1 second. Can you see it?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Perfect. Let me put this on presenter mode. All right, perfect. Okay, so thank you so much, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you so much to the organizers for inviting me to speak on behalf of MMV and in providing you with the latest update related to primaquine and tafenoquine. So this is a snapshot of my presentation today. I will try to keep this as short as possible. And as you can see, I will provide a tafenoquine access update and give you as well an overview of the different feasibility studies that we are currently conducting together with partners on the use of the G6PD test and tafenoquine and primaquine in a number of countries. And then very quickly, I will also provide you with a very quick overview of the current development, which is ongoing on the pediatric primaquine in collaboration with Fosun, and our current and ongoing collaboration with WHO GMP. So I think that you all know by now what is tafenoquine, but just to really very quickly recap, as you know, it's a drug that has been co-developed by both GSK and MMV, and it's a very exciting drug because for the first time in 60 years, we now have new tools for Vivax malaria. And as you all know, it's a single dose treatment. So it's given in 2 pills of 150 milligram, and it has to be given with chloroquine as a blood stage treatment. And obviously, a single dose treatment is definitely of high interest when we see the poor compliance of patients with Primaquine 7 or 14-day treatment regimens. And we have actually been able to show that tafenoquine, when given unobserved compared to Primaquine, has an increased effectiveness, at least in Brazil, and that was shown in the TRUST feasibility study that I will talk about in a minute. And then finally, tafenoquine, similar to Primaquine, requires a quantitative G6PD testing because it can only be given to a patient with normal G6PD enzymatic activity. So moving to, moving to an overview of where do we stand on tafenoquine. And as you can see on the left, I have put the two major steps that are required in order for a drug to be available at country level. And the first step, as you know, is really related to the registration of the drug, which is an assessment on the quality and efficacy of a drug, which is done by National Drug Regulatory Authority. And on top, you can see that we put both the adult tafenoquine formulation, which, as I mentioned, are 2 tablets of 150 milligram, and as well as pediatric tafenoquine, which is presented in a tablet of 50 milligram, and it's a dispersible tablet, which is of great interest when given to children. And many of you know that the adult tafenoquine tablet has already been approved by 2 stringent regulatory authorities back in 2018 in Australia and by the US FDA. And since then, it has also been approved in 6 malaria endemic countries. So Brazil, Thailand, Peru, Colombia, Ethiopia, and Philippines. And it has also been submitted in 3 additional countries, such as Vietnam, Myanmar, and Pakistan. And we are waiting for the final registration in those countries. And then finally, it has also been submitted, it will be submitted, by the end of the year, hopefully in 4 additional countries. Now, moving to the pediatric tafenoquine formulation, it was registered by the Australian TGA back in March 2022. And since then, it has also been registered in Brazil. And as you can see, it has already been submitted in 3 additional countries and will be submitted soon in additional 9 countries. For India, we are currently working with GSK in order to prepare and hopefully start a phase 3 study in India in order to get both the adult and the pediatric formulation of tafenoquine registered there. And then finally, as I mentioned, the final step is really the policy adoption. And this is really for the National Malaria Program to implement and to include in a treatment malaria guideline those new tools and starts in order to be able to start implementing that. And Thailand was really the first country to approve the use of tafenoquine for the treatment of Vivax and are in the process of revising their treatment guideline. Brazil has also decided to adopt both, of course, the tafenoquine and the G6PD test in their public health system called SUS. And I will speak a bit more about those 2 countries in a minute. And then in addition, just for you to know that Peru has also incorporated tafenoquine in their essential medicine list. And both Vietnam and Cambodia have also included tafenoquine in their treatment guideline update. So moving to global tafenoquine access updates, and we keep being asked lots of questions. Okay, one, is tafenoquine going to be included into the WHO GMP treatment guideline? And this is to provide you with where do we stand today on those 2 different steps. And the first one is really related to the pre-qualification program, because the inclusion of tafenoquine in the WHO GMP treatment guideline and its pre-qualification is dependent on the pre-qualification by WHO of the SD biosensor G6PD test. And the SD biosensor has been submitted to the pre-qualification back in January 2021, and its evaluation is currently ongoing. And it is expected that the result will be obtained in beginning of next year. And of course, then for tafenoquine to be pre-qualified by WHO, this needs to, for WHO pre-qualification, to issue an expression of interest to which GSK will then be able to respond. In the recent WHO GMP MPAC meeting at the end of last month, Andrea Bosman provided an update about the process and where do they stand. And it is planned to have a guideline development group meeting happening on the 14th and 15th of November, which will be assessing the evidence related to tafenoquine and safety and efficacy, but also its implementation in countries like Brazil, for example. And we are and they are expected to release the final recommendation in April next year. So we have been working very closely with different Ministries of Health to really help them get the evidence that they need in order to be able to take an informed decision on whether they can implement the G6PD test together with tafenoquine and primaquine in different settings. And really the key question is whether the healthcare workers in those countries at different levels of the healthcare system can use a more complex algorithm and provide those new tools. So we have done, and we are currently in the process of doing a number of different feasibility studies, which are really looking at the operational feasibility of providing those the appropriate radical cure treatments based on a G6PD test results. And we are also looking at acceptability and cost effectiveness during those different studies. And so you may have heard about those two studies that have already been completed. So the TRUST study, which was done by the Ministry of Health in Brazil, and the recruitment is over, and we are in the process of, we have actually drafted a publication, and it's currently under review. And I'm sure that Dr. Prayut will be talking more about the second study that has just been finished in August this year, which is called the Arctic study, which was done by the DDBD in Thailand. We also have 3 additional ongoing studies which are supported by UNITED in Peru, looking at tafenoquine, and the first patient was recruited in August, and 2 additional studies looking at the high dose of primaquine over 7 days in Indonesia, and this is led by Menzies and the Ministry of Health, and in PNG, which is led by Burnett together with the Ministry of Health. And again, in those 2 studies, the first patient, we were very excited to see that the first patient was recruited in this month, actually in November, in both countries. We have 2 additional studies looking at the introduction of tafenoquine with the G6PD test, which are also supported by UNITED and are planned to start in first semester next year, which are led by PAS in both Ethiopia and Vietnam. And then finally, in order to support also the phase 3 study in India, we will also be doing national treatment selection in India, and this is expected to start in Q1 2024 and will be led by NRMR and ICMR. This is about the TRUST study. I'm going to go very quickly about that. There has been a number of presentations, including at the ACMH conference last month. And this study was done in the Amazon region in Brazil, which was, and in 2 different cities, Manaus and Porto Velho, in 49 health facilities. This study was really led by the Ministry of Health and supported by Professor Marcus Aceda from FMT and Dr. Delio Pereira in CEPEM. And as you can see, it was done in a very dense population area. And I'm just going to present that overview slides looking at the result, the overall result of the TRUST study. And as you can see, quite significant number of patients were included in that study. So more than 6,000 patients were included in that observational study, with more than 2,600 on tafenoquine. And when looking at the primary objective, which was really only focusing on the appropriate use and non-use of tafenoquine, As you can see, it's really a fascinating result of more than 99% or 99.7% of appropriate use and non-use of tafenoquine. And as you can see, interestingly, actually, the secondary objective looking at appropriate use and non-use of daily primaquine was a bit inferior at 88%, and which is probably based due to the fact that primaquine has been used for many years in Brazil. And so looking at the key result from TRUST, really, well, this is the first, but also, of course, the largest experience with tafenoquine for radical cure. And as I mentioned, tafenoquine was correctly used in more than 99% of the cases based on the G6PD enzymatic activity of the patient, both at the higher and lower level facilities. And there were 16 patients to which tafenoquine was not used appropriately and given to 5 G6PD deficient patients and 11 patients with intermediate G6PD enzymatic activity. And the study really shown that the training can be done and was successfully conducted by municipal health staff with support from the expert running the study using standardized material. And there was more hospitalization with primaquine-related THA, which is due to the higher adherence to the treatment selection for tafenoquine as compared to primaquine. And so following that study, as I mentioned earlier, Brazil has really been leading the way together with Thailand by deciding in June to incorporate tafenoquine and the G6PD test in their public health system called SUS. I will not go into the details of that because the Prayut will be presenting the Arctic study, just to say that the appropriate use and non-use of tafenoquine and primaquine in that feasibility study done in Thailand was 100%, which is extremely good. And there was no case of acute hemolytic anemia. So what are the next steps for both Brazil and Thailand? First of all, it's very good to note that the GSK Global Safety Board have provided a green light for the rollout of tafenoquine in different countries. And so now we are in a process of working with the Ministry of Health and with GSK on the procurement aspect in order to make sure that tafenoquine, of course, the G6PD test as well, will be made available. So we are really working around the planning of that, finalizing the training materials in order to give access to the patient who needs those drugs. And some pack of tafenoquine has already reached Thailand, which is very exciting. On pediatric primaquine, just to let you know that we have a collaboration ongoing with Fosun for the development of a 2.5 and 5 milligram dispersible tablet. We have just finalized the bioequivalence study, and we are planning to submit the dossier to the WHO pre-qualification in 2024. And then finally, just to say that we have ongoing collaboration with WHO GMP. As I mentioned, they will be meeting, the guideline development group will be meeting mid-November and will be focusing on 8-aminoquinoline. And we have provided a number of different materials to WHO GMP to make sure that they have access to the latest available information. And we also have regular monthly meeting together with United and WHO GMP to provide updates on the different feasibility studies that I mentioned and progress on the primaquine pediatric development. And with this, I'm going to stop here, and I would like to thank all the different partners or donors and our collaborative partners with whom we are collaborating on all the different feasibility study and work. Thank you so much. And I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Dr. Elodie, many thanks for that fantastic update on tafenoquine and all the studies from MMV going on. I'm sure our participants will have lots of questions to ask you. And I want to reiterate that to the participants that you can either hold on to your questions so that you can ask to Dr. Elodie in the Q&A round, or you can type in your question in the Q&A box right now, so that can be addressed right away. After this, we are moving on to a very quick fire round where we'll have 4 presenters presenting very quickly on new studies and approaches that they're associated with. First up, like Dr. Elodie mentioned, Dr. Prayuth will be presenting the Arctic study. And we are really grateful to Dr. Prayuth because he is traveling and currently in Chiang Mai and still joining the call. Dr. Prayuth, you're up next. Dr. Prayuth is the Deputy Director of the Division of VVPD in Thai Ministry of Public Health. And he's very heavily involved in malaria research studies and has decades of experiences, having led the malaria program at TVA previously. Dr. Prayuth, over to you.
Yes, good afternoon. Do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Dr. Prayuth.
Okay. Do you see my slides?
Yeah, we can see your slides.
Okay. Yeah. I would like to update the accessing of radical kill in routine care for tafenoquine in Thailand that we implement last year. We just finished collection data in just a few months ago. So this is context for Thailand. Currently, Vivax is the majority of species in Thailand now, and the Ministry of Public Health is interested in measuring the operational feasibility of TQ to support malaria elimination in Thailand. And we work with WHO and Thai FDA to develop 3S project to involve for pharmacovigilance for tafenoquine in Thailand. And in this project, we have supported from MMB for technical support and also financial support. So the key objective of this study is to measure the appropriate use of tafenoquine and primaquine based on GCPD testing. And also we would like to measure the frequency of the acute hemolytic anemia in this study. So the study implemented in 2 provinces in the north and the south. We classify into 2 phases. The first phase implement in hospitals, district hospital, in 5 hospitals, 2 in the north and 3 in the south. And the second phase, we involve malaria clinics at the communities in the study in 4 malaria clinics. This is total number of patients that has been recruited in these studies. In the first phase, we implement in hospitals, we collect 120 Vivax cases, and at the end of this study, the patient were included in the study are 187. So mostly patients are from the north, and only 39 cases from malaria clinics at community levels. So in the next slides, I will present only in the interim analysis that we collect 120 Vivax cases. This is the GCPD activity by genders. As you can see here, it's about 11% classified as the deficiencies, and 38% are intermediates, and about 50% are normal GCPD activities in these studies. So in general, in the first objectives, 100% of patients that appropriate use and non-use of tafenoquine actually had the GCPD over 6.1, and also an appropriate use of the primaquine and non-use of primaquine also 100%. So in general, the samples in these studies, they use tafenoquine and primaquines according to GCPD activities. So, and from safety follow-ups, we don't see any serious adverse events under this study. We have 3 patients hospitalized, but it's not related to primaquine or tafenoquine. It's from co-infections with leptospirosis and scrub typhus, and 1 patient with thalassemia. So in this study, we do not detect AHA related to primaquine and tafenoquine in the study. So what is the key findings in these studies is the all patients treated with appropriate Vivax reticle kill in line with GCPD activities in Thailand, and we found very high follow-up rate for tafenoquine at day 5 and day 14. And the important thing, we don't see any serious adverse events. We see only few symptoms, SE, such as fatigue, nausea, or headache. And we detect no acute hemolytic anemia in this study, actually. So in conclusion, for TQ, they are 100% of correctly used according to GCPD activities under these studies. And we present this to the National Communicable Disease committees and also the National Malaria Treatment Committees in Thailand. And these committees approved tafenoquine for reticle kill for Vivax for adults. And we are currently revising treatment guideline to be used. And we are rolling out tafenoquine in 6 provinces along the Thai-Myanmar border here in this year. And also we established subcommittees to set up GCPD quality assurance systems to ensure the PV monitoring system in Thailand. So this is update from Thailand for the feasibility of tafenoquine and GCPD quantitative testing in Thailand. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Praith, for that encouraging results from Thailand. Now, from Thailand, we move on to Latin America, where Dr. Alice Sena will be presenting us about the Kiruma project. At APMEN, we are very eager to have cross-learnings from regions and look at innovations that might be useful for Asia Pacific. The Kiruma project is actually a radical cure for highly mobile and hard-to-reach population in the Guyana Sea. And right now, it's really early morning in the French Guiana. So Dr. Alice has sent us a video. And I kindly request Dr. Phone to put up the video and let us all learn about the Kiruma project.
And I'm here to present you the Kiruma project. I'm part of a research team which is leading 2 successive research projects about evaluation of interventions targeting malaria transmission among hard-to-reach populations, specifically persons involved in the artisanal and small-scale gold mining in the Guiana Shale. We are working in Suriname, French Guiana, and the Amapá State of Brazil, a territory which is characterized by decreasing malaria incidence and large majority of cases related to Plasmodium vivax. Target population works in an environment which is favorable to malaria transmission, deep in the rainforest. They live and work far away from health facilities, so they can self-treat themselves with smuggled drugs in case they present malaria symptoms. They have prolonged stays from several months to several years deep in the rainforest, but they also present high regional scale mobility associated immigration and circular local, often transborder mobility. Usually the activity is informal or even illegal, and so it can be repressed by police operation. Our current project is called Curena, and it would like to face two challenges: the challenge of mobilizing the community for malaria elimination in the context of transmission, and the need to address specific problems, specific challenges of Plasmodium vivax transmission in cold mining areas. Our intervention proposed three modules: Plasmodium vivax radical treatment, proposed that inclusion for participants; the malaria kit proposed to be taken away for participants; and malaria education activities for included participants, but also in general. The intervention was started in the first quarter of 23, it will last until the end of 24. The objective of the intervention is to reduce malaria transmission in the area, and we would like to evaluate the effectiveness of this intervention through our quasi-experimental pre-post evaluation, and also to evaluate the implementation of the intervention. And in this, with this aim, we will use both quantitative and qualitative methods. About the first service, the radical cure, it is in fact a targeted drug administration against Vivax, which have as purpose to reduce relapses risk for persons that usually self-treat themselves without a radical cure when they present malaria symptoms, and also to reduce asymptomatic Plasmodium vivax carriage among the population. For symptomatic and parasitemic persons, the usual malaria program treatment is used. The malaria program protocol is used. So specifically, our research project in this context target asymptomatic individuals that we consider at risk for Plasmodium vivax carriage. They are selected to a questionnaire which investigates declared recent malaria or recent exposure to Plasmodium vivax in dense transmission areas. And we also evaluate the eligibility for the 8-aminoquinoline treatment through GCSPT tests, pregnancy tests, and a few more questions. And participants have to accept a 13-day follow-up. So they are eligible, they can receive in the first period of the study chloroquine and 7 days treatment with chloroquine. And then as soon as it will be available for our study, we switch to phenocryl. And the follow-up is realized in person or even by phone call or by a smartphone app that was offline. The malaria kit is described more in detail in the publication that I mentioned in this slide. It is a self-test and self-treatment kit that miners can take away and they can use when they experience malaria symptoms. They are trained to use it, and all the items are provided for free. And here are some examples of educational tools we developed with the community, because we use a participatory approach in our project. And one of the specificities of our implementation strategy is to provide these services in the logistical hubs of the garimpeiros, of the gold miners, where they can be easily met when they move across the region. And our field workers are communicable. So thank you very much for your attention. Please to introduce our international team and to acknowledge our funders and institutional partners. And here you can find our website and our contacts if you would like to ask some questions. Thank you very much again.
We are really grateful to Dr. Alice for sending in her video. And although she's on online right now, if you have any questions to her, we'll make sure that your questions will reach to her, and then we'll have them answered by Dr. Alice for you in our next communication. And if you have any questions for our previous speakers, please feel free to type it in the Q&A. Now, moving on back to, again, Thailand, we have Dr. Tom Pito from Moru, and he will be presenting on tafenoquine drug administration or prophylaxis, potential tools for vivax elimination. Dr. Tom is an infectious disease epidemiologist working since 2012 in the Malaria and Critical Illness Department at the Mahidol Oxford Tropical Medicine Research Unit in Bangkok. Dr. Tom, can we please have you on the screen now?
Thank you very much, Manesh. Can I share my slides now?
Please do.
Okay, let's see if this works.
Yeah, we can see your slides.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity, Carrie, as well, to talk to the group briefly about a clinical trial that we're proposing, which is what I would like to discuss with you now. Oh, start video. Okay, so this would be an individually randomized controlled trial to compare a practicable prophylactic regimen with tefenoquine versus one-off treatment yearly of tefenoquine as protection.
We have the screen switch. Can you switch the screen? We see your presenter view actually.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you could switch it out to, yeah.
Can I? Let me try again.
No worries.
This. Okay, is that visible now?
This is better, much better.
Thank you, sorry. So this is a proposed clinical trial to look at a potential new tool for Vivax elimination. So the target of eliminating all human malarias from Asia by the end of the 2020s is an ambitious one. Obviously, the key tool, the most important tool, is going to be early treatment with effective drugs, both for falciparum and for Vivax. But there may be interventions at community level which could help interrupt transmission or provide protection during periods of high risk that would be appropriate in some areas. So mass drug administration has been trialled by our group, MORU, and many others across the region, and has been highly successful in many circumstances. However, the effect on Vivax has been transitory because the drugs which have been used have always been focused on safe, well-tolerated cure of falciparum infections, driven largely by concerns over the emergence and spread of multi-drug resistant and artemisinin-resistant falciparum. So these MDAs have sort of established the principle that these can work, but the drugs used have not been appropriate, or have not been the best regimens for Vivax infections. We've also trialed chemoprophylaxis. We did an individually randomized controlled trial of about 1,500 people in Cambodia, and then followed them up for 3 months with the comparing artemether-lumefantrine, so an ACT, against a vitamin pill, basically like a placebo control, they're not actually placebo. And we saw about a 6-fold reduction in infections during that period. Most of those infections that were detected were Vivax. But of course, an ACT is not radical cure for Vivax, so this is suboptimal. What's darling, I'm in a meeting. Ellen, thank you. Thanks. Sorry, my daughter just got back from school. So now that we have quantitative measures of G6PD deficient, these biosensors, and now that we've got more experience of using them in remote communities with community health workers, it may be possible to use a radical cure presumptively as prophylaxis or as targeted drug administration in a vastly safer way than it could have been done before. Tefenoquine prophylaxis is already approved by the US FDA, but it's designed for travelers from rich countries who are coming in without immunity, going to take it at high doses and then leave again. So the regimen, with the standard regimen, it may not be suitable for people living within endemic countries were it to be used. In the first instance, what is generally recommended is a weekly regimen. After discussions with people from different control programs and people from international NGOs and working with WHO, we thought that it may be that the weekly regimen is just completely impracticable in endemic villages, but that potentially giving the tafenoquine once a month would be more practicable and would have almost the same effect so as weekly. There have been small studies which have demonstrated this before, but monthly would seem to have a huge advantage over weekly in terms of how easy it would be to implement. And that's not saying that even monthly would be so easy. So what we're interested in is, does the simplest good quality regimen of tafenoquine prophylaxis, does that give substantial protection, and does that persist over a year? So this would be giving, for example, 3 months during the period of higher risk, if you know, and Vivax isn't strongly seasonal everywhere, but in places where it is, that would be the aim. So giving about 3 months of protection, and then comparing to one, an arm where there's only placebo given, so a control arm, and two, giving it just once. So instead of having to go back and find the person again several times, you would give tafenoquine just once. And depending on the force of infection, I mean, how many of these infections are relapses and how many are newly acquired, it might be that just getting rid of the existing infections inside a person, so what they have in their blood at baseline, without really much prophylactic effect, just getting rid of the hypnozoids once a year would be enough to offer a large level of protection, perhaps not quite as good as prophylaxis, but if it was similarly good, then it might be much easier to do tafenoquine administration targeted at high-risk people once a year. So this would be sort of analogous a bit to what was done in China with the sort of spring cleaning, where they gave primaquine sort of at the start of the transmission season. So 3 arms, a prophylaxis hopefully made as simple as possible, once off tafenoquine, and then a group of people from the same communities who don't receive anything. So an individually randomized controlled trial is what we were considering. But, sorry. And then this is just to illustrate that the preliminary PK modeling that's been done by our unit suggests that it's unlikely to be any major benefit from giving tafenoquine at a slightly higher dose. There are studies looking at that for treatment at the moment, but for people who are not clinically sick, just a high-risk population, the 300 milligram single dose should afford about a month of protection. And actually, even once it's below the therapeutic concentration needed for prophylaxis, it may still have some effect even after that. So based on experience with previous trials of chemoprophylaxis and also with mass drug administration trials, where a large effect was shown in the study, but it has not been taken up at the kind of scale that was originally anticipated. The recommendation of 3 rounds of a complete course of ACTs is actually quite a lot of work for people to put into practice in remote communities. And so what we wouldn't wish to do is trial a regimen of tafenoquine which people from the control programs or other partners would feel could never be implemented anyway. You know, that it would not be practicable even if it was shown to be effective. So thank you for your attention and the opportunity. Yes, if anybody could speak to those questions that I have, is this the sort of trial that could be informative, and is tafenoquine prophylaxis or annual tafenoquine at high-risk groups a strategy that could be considered in some circumstances as a way to accelerate Vivax elimination? Okay, thank you very much for your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Tom, for that conceptual note on MDA with tafenoquine. I'm sure our participants will be interested, particularly in the national malaria programs. We're looking at prophylaxis for Vivax malaria. I'm sure there will be lots of questions and lots of queries to you. Now, for the last presenter in this quick fire round, which hasn't been so quick so far, we have Dr. Moses Laman from Papua New Guinea. He will be talking about short course primaquine for the radical cure of Vivax. To introduce Dr. Moses, he is the Principal Research Fellow, the Head of Vector-Borne Disease Unit, and the Deputy Director of PNG's Institute for Medical Research. Dr. Moses, over to you.
Thank you, Manas. Hello, everyone. Moses Laman from Papua New Guinea. I'm going to present on behalf of our bigger team. As you may know, or you might not know, the scope group of studies happen in both Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, but I'll speak briefly on what we are just starting in Papua New Guinea. In Indonesia, this program of work is led by Rick and Rini and Ivodian, the team there in Papua New Guinea. Lian and our teams will lead those programs of work in PNG. Manas, can you see my slide?
I can see the slide, but it's not in presenter in the full screen mode. Could you please kindly make it full screen? Yeah,
yep,
better, much better.
Okay, thank you. So this is a feasibility study, as we had some of those were discussed by Ilodia earlier on about the program of PAVE activities in PNG in Indonesia. And this is health facility-based implementation study happening in 4 Vivax endemic provinces in Papua New Guinea. Unfortunately for us in Papua New Guinea, Vivax and malaria in general is still a big problem, and it accounts for about 86% of the malaria burden in the Western Pacific region. Vivax is still a big problem for us, and majority of the deaths in the Western Pacific region is from Papua New Guinea. Our health system is weaker than probably most of your settings, and so for us, trying to contain malaria is still a challenge for us, and so for Vivax, a lot of patients still come down with Vivax, and the National Malaria Control Program uses a very conservative low dose of 0.25 mg per kilogram. There is no G6PD testing prior to treatment, and there is no proper pharmacovigilance when primaquine is used. And so as part of this study, in our setting, the main overall aim is to determine the feasibility and cost effectiveness of introducing a revised case management package to facilitate radical cure in these selected settings. And this would include point of care quantitative G6PD testing with biosensor in those facilities, and high-dose primaquine use if it's depending on G6PD activity. For those with greater than 70% activity, they'll be given 1 mg per kilogram or 7 days, and those with intermediate activity, they'll be given 0.5 mg per kilogram or 14 days. And also those who are found to be less than 30% activity, the aim is to give 0.75 mg per kilogram weekly for 8 weeks. And so that's the kind of regimen that we are assessing its feasibility in this setting. And also to improve patient counseling tools and processes in pre-treatment regarding the importance and risk of primaquine therapy, as well as community-based clinical reviews at day 3 particularly, to encourage adherence. And also we are following patients up at day 7 as well. And also to improve malariametric surveillance and pharmacovigilance. And for that, we are working with the provincial health authorities in Papua New Guinea and those facilities where we are working, as well as the National Department of Health, to try to develop pharmacovigilance at the national level as well. So to date, we have just started surveillance for Vivax in those facilities have been going for about a year now, but in terms of the stage 1 for the PAVE and scope studies, we have just started in Papua New Guinea. In one side, the first 16 patients have been enrolled. Dr. Mary Malai is the lead clinician leading those body of work in Papua New Guinea. And the team are preparing to commence one of the second sites starting up the study now. But otherwise, all the follow-ups on day 3 and 7 have been going on eventfully. We have had one SAE and one adverse event of special interest in those settings. And the overall aim is to discuss with the safety review committee once both sites, Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, reach about the first 100 patients. But in terms of stage 1, whether we progress on to stage 2 or not will very much depend on those safety parameters in both countries. But that is in brief, very brief, the update of the progress of activities on the ground in Papua New Guinea. And there are many people and funders who are supporting us, and I cannot name all of them, but thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Moses, for updating us about this study with higher dose PQ7 regimen. We wish you the best for the study, and hopefully we have some encouraging results from them. Now, moving on from radical cure to universal radical cure, we have Dr. Kamala Thremer from the Menzies School of Health Research, who will be highlighting.
I think we lost you, Manash.
Sorry, Manash, you're on mute.
Okay, somehow I got muted. Maybe just the heavens. But anyways, universal radical cure, an additional tool towards malaria elimination. What is it? How does it work? And where do we need it? Dr. Kamala Thremer, over to you.
Thank you very much, Manash, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you all. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces on the screen here, and feel free to switch on your cameras that I can actually see you. As Manash introduced already, I'm going to talk about universal radical cure, and that's probably a fairly new concept for many of you, but Liane has kindly alluded to it already in her earlier presentation around the use of serological tools that can potentially be used to better inform universal radical cure. So I'll start with just talking about what universal radical cure actually is, and then talk a bit why we think it is a good idea that we might be using it, and then present some results from a recent clinical trial that supports the use of universal radical cure. So as you all know, and we have heard already a lot, I think we are all familiar with what radical cure is. So that combined treatment with both triazolidine treatment as well as primaquine or tafenoquine when we see patients, or when we encounter patients that have acute Vivax malaria. Whereas patients that present with falciparum malaria usually are only treated with an ACT and then a single dose of primaquine for transmission blocking purposes, but aren't receiving radical cure. So when we talk about universal radical cure, we talk about expanding the use or the indication of when we use radical cure to those patients that present with falciparum malaria as well, in areas that are co-endemic for both species. Of course, this would simplify things a lot, but might have its challenges as well. And as I said, I'll talk a bit more about why we think this is a good thing to do and what the rationale behind this in a minute. But I wanted to briefly just use the opportunity to talk about the different doses, particularly because we are using this high dose treatment that Moses also referred to in his short presentation. So just as a reiteration, we usually distinguish between the low and the high dose primaquine treatment, the low, both referring to the total dose that we are providing, low dose being the 3.5 milligram per kilogram total dose given. This can be given over 14 days, so at 0.25 milligram per kilogram per day, or at a shorter duration, which has recently, or well, a year ago, been approved by WHO. So either 0.25 milligram per kilogram per day, which most countries used so far, or increased to 0.5 milligram per kilogram per day over 7 days. And this has been after the WHO approval been implemented in a couple of countries, if I'm not mistaken, Laos and Cambodia, and more recently Pakistan as well, and I'm sure some others as well. Then we have what we call the high dose primaquine treatment, so a higher 7 milligram per kilogram total dose. This is recommended in areas of high relapse frequency, so areas of Oceania. And again, this can potentially be also given as a 7-day treatment where we then increase this dose to 1 milligram per kilogram per day. And again, Moses has referred to the work that is ongoing to assess the feasibility of this treatment. For those interested in those different doses, I'd recommend you to look at those 2 publications that really use a lot of patient data to look both at efficacy of this high versus low dose options, as well as looking at safety of the different daily doses. And for those who prefer to watch, I'm sure there is a recording from the last APMEN Tech Talk as well, that clearly showed, those data clearly showed that the higher dose primaquine treatment is beneficial in almost all areas, not just Oceania, where it's currently recommended. And that in terms of safety, at least the 0.5 milligram per kilogram per day is safe in patients above 30% G6PD deficiency. So in this trial, the way I'm going to present data, we also use this high dose 7-day treatment. And I'll show you some of the safety data that we produced here as well. So why do we think universal radical cure is a good idea? Liane already mentioned there is this increased risk of Vivax after falciparum malaria in areas that are co-endemic. And this is data from therapeutic efficacy trials that recruited falciparum patients and initially obviously looked at falciparum recurrences as an outcome, but also recorded Vivax recurrences. And you can see here that this risk of Vivax is fairly high and is higher than we would anticipate from the normal background relapse rate. This risk is also increased in areas that have short relapse periodicity and that have a short, that in areas that use ACTs with a short half-life, as you can see here on the right-hand side in those patients that received AL compared to those that received DHA piperacin. So for patients that present with falciparum malaria, receive an ACT, their greatest risk of a recurrent parasitemia is actually from Vivax rather than falciparum malaria. And this really creates the rationale to potentially treat those patients with radical cure as well. So we have some early evidence of potential benefits on universal radical cure from a cluster randomized controlled trial conducted in Papua province in Indonesia, where the primary aim was to compare supervised versus unsupervised radical cure, but both PF and PV patients were treated. And if we just look at those patients that present with falciparum initially and look at their risk of Vivax episodes afterwards, you can see that in the supervised radical cure arm, this is much lower than compared to the unsupervised radical cure arm that obviously had a lot of patients that didn't get the full or didn't take the full treatment dose. So suggesting that effective radical cure can reduce this risk of Vivax after falciparum malaria. Universal radical cure might not be as beneficial as we think in all areas, or the benefit might not be the same. And this is data from the Thai-Myanmar border showing that this risk of Vivax after falciparum decreases over time as malaria, the overall malaria burden went down. So coming to our study that I want to present to you today. So we recruited patients with falciparum malaria, screened them for G6PD at the 70% threshold because we wanted to use a higher dose primaquine regimen. We randomized them into a control arm and to an intervention arm. The control arm received normal schizontoside treatment and the single dose primaquine for transmission blocking purposes as per guidelines. And then in the intervention arm, we treated patients with the schizontoside treatment and this high-dose 7-day primaquine treatment. We then followed patient up over 63 days. Patients in the intervention arm had additional visits to ensure treatment adherence. And we recruited 500 patients across 3 study sites in Bangladesh, Ethiopia, and Indonesia. And you see the lovely collaborators here on the slide. Dr. Tamaru Digaga from Ethiopia, Professor Inge Sutanto in Indonesia, and Dr. Shafiul Alam in Bangladesh led the respective study sites. There are a lot of words here on the slides. I just want to highlight the most important endpoints here. So we looked both at efficacy and safety, and the most important endpoint that we were interested in terms of the efficacy was the ability of universal radical cure to reduce the risk of Vivax after falciparum. So we looked at the incidence risk of Vivax at day 63 and compared these among the 2 groups. When we look at safety, particularly with the high-dose primaquine, we are concerned about potential GI tolerability. So we looked at adverse events and vomiting and GI symptoms particularly. And then, of course, we looked at the hemolytic outcomes among those patients, as well as you can see here in the lower part of the safety box here. So just showing you the flow of the study. So we, as I mentioned, we randomized a total of 500 patients across those 3 study sites. We were able to include 495 in the analysis. Here on the left-hand side, you have the patients in the intervention arm included in the intention to treat analysis. So where all patients were included independent of whether they actually took the complete treatment. And then a similar number of patients included in the control arm. We also did a per protocol analysis where that had a few less patients here, but I'll focus my talk today on the intention to treat analysis, and no big differences there between those 2 slightly different types of analysis. So this is really the main result and the take-home message here. So here is the Kaplan-Meier graph looking at the incidence risk of Vivax parasitemia at day 63. On the y-axis here, we have the risk of any Vivax episode. And on the x-axis, we have the time patients were included in the study at day 0, when they were recruited with falciparum malaria. Then we observed them and followed them up over 63 days. In red, we have our standard care arm, so the control arm here, and then in blue, our intervention arm. And you can see that the risk of Vivax is much higher in our control arm compared to our intervention arm, with 11% risk of Vivax in the control arm compared to 2.5% risk in the intervention arm. So this is we can achieve a 5-fold reduction, or in this study, we achieved a 5-fold reduction of the risk of Vivax after falciparum when we treated patients with radical cure. This is the same result here, just in the first line of that table. And you can see that we see very similar significant differences when we look at the earlier time points at day 42 and day 28 in this analysis. What we also see here when we look at the risk of any falciparum parasitemia, that we don't see any differences across the 2 treatment arms as we would expect. So just digging a little bit deeper into some of the sub-analysis, you might be aware that the 3 countries that we included in the analysis use different schizontoscidal treatments, and we use the schizontoscidal treatment that is part of the national guidelines and routine practice. So this was methyllumefantrine for the study sites in Bangladesh and Ethiopia, and DHA piperacin at the study site in Indonesia. And so in the first part of this graph, now highlighted in red, you see this kind of divided up by the schizontoscidal treatment. And in dark black, you have the control arm, and then in blue, you have the high-dose primaquine or the intervention arm. And you see that this effect that we are seeing is much, much larger in the AL countries compared to the DHA piperacin countries, where there is a much smaller difference. And again, this is as we would expect, because we know that this risk of Vivax after falciparum is higher depending on the half-life of the ACT that we're using. And this risk is increased in places that are when AL is used. If we look down by country, very similar results. Of course, the results are very much driven by the Ethiopian side that had a much, much larger sample size compared to the Bangladeshi side, for example. We see similar results in Bangladesh and Ethiopia, but of course, much, much larger confidence intervals here because of the different sample size for Bangladesh. But I guess highlighting that universal radical cure might be more beneficial in some areas, in particular in countries that use AL compared to those that use DHA piperacin. What about safety? We'll dive right into it. So we had 2 serious adverse events, both in the intervention arm. They both presented with GI intolerability issues leading to hospital admission overnight. They resolved, and were considered to be unlikely related to treatment. Very little GI symptoms otherwise, and very similar across treatment arms. And one of the reasons we think this is the case, we know that higher doses of primaquine are associated with increased GI tolerability, but we think they can be mitigated by the provision of food. And so in this study, we purposefully provided food with each of the drug doses to the patients. And we think that is at least part of the explanation why we don't really see differences here between the two arms in terms of their GI tolerability. Then moving on to the hemolytic safety outcomes, again, just a reminder, so those were patients that were screened for G6PD, and only patients that had an G6PD activity above 70%, so that were G6PD normal, were included. And we can see here very reassuring numbers. First of all, very few patients that actually had drops, none that dropped below 5, very few patients that dropped below 7, and there were similarly similar numbers between the intervention and the control arms, both at day 2, which you see in the first part, in the upper part of the table, and at day 7 in the lower part of the table, suggesting that those drops are probably more linked to the actual malaria episode than to the treatment. So I think we can conclude from this data that this high-dose primaquine regimen was very well tolerated in this patient cohort and reduced the risk of Vivax after falciparum 5-fold. Universal radical cure really could be a great tool to target this hidden reservoir that we otherwise aren't seeing, and has the potential to accelerate malaria elimination. Whether it should be used with a serological test to be more targeted or not is probably a very exciting discussion we might have later on. In addition, it really provides important additional safety data for high daily dose primaquine in patients with G6PD above 70%, independent of whether they are presenting with falciparum or Vivax malaria. Just wanted to end here acknowledging, as this has been a large team effort, lots of people involved, many of them on the call here today as well. Just want to thank all of them for their contributions. It's been a very challenging study, started pre-COVID, and we've managed to finish recruitment throughout the pandemic. So thanks to everyone who has been working on this, and really interested to hear your thoughts in terms of how whether that concept of universal radical cure is something that programs are considering or are interested to consider. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kamla. You've enlightened us with the idea of extending radical cure to falciparum patients, and also shared the results of your study. So thank you so much for that. And to reflect on your study results from a national malaria point of view, we have Dr. Ahmad Habib, who is a malaria advisor at the Common Management Unit in Pakistan, which manages the Global Fund grants to implement AIDS, TB, and malaria care project in Pakistan. And it'll be particularly interesting to hear his thoughts, given that Pakistan is highly endemic for Vivax, and they have shifted recently to lower dose PQ7. So I give the floor to Dr. Hamad to share his thoughts on the study results. Dr. Hamad, over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Manash?
We can hear you.
Many thanks. So it was a wonderful presentation by Professor Kamala, and I'm thankful to APMEN, Dr. Caroline, Dr. Manash for all this consideration. So I'll just briefly present some information about Pakistan, which you have very rightly mentioned, why we are interested in what's the importance of these studies. I think this is a very nice study, very relevant findings to our settings. So just as a brief background, the climatic changes in 2022 have basically hampered a lot Pakistan. This malaria situation was quite good in 2021, but 2022 floods have basically changed the overall dynamics. We used to have around 0.4 million cases, confirmed cases in country during 2021 and earlier, but now we are having more than 1.7 and 1.8 million cases. So if you can just see and appreciate the scenario, you can see that from 2021, in 2022, the country is having more than 0.16 million confirmed cases. And during 2023, the situation is even worse. Even till this time, during last 9 months, the cases have crossed 1.8 million. There has been a shift. So falciparum was relatively controlled earlier, but during last year, it's around 30%, and even in this year, the overall proportion of falciparum cases is quite high. So coming to this study's finding, it's again, as Dr. Professor Kamala has mentioned, it's a new concept for me when I was invited for this reflection. So it's quite a new concept, and it's very encouraging for us. My concerns as a national program working under this ministry is that, of course, when we are talking about more quantities of primaquine, we need more resources. More funds will be required. We already have some concerns regarding the compliance to the radical cure with use of primaquine, even for the Vivax cases. Because in many areas of Pakistan, since malaria is a disease in which many rural areas are mostly affected. These are poor people, poor communities. So we do not have access to G6PD testing. So in the absence of G6PD testing, the compliance, if we shift from single dose to increased number of dosage for primaquine, I think the compliance will even be on a lesser side. So we need to focus more, and we will be a bit worried about the compliance overall when we have this shift. We understand that feasibility of a pilot study based on Pakistan settings will be very helpful to understand the contextual and operational challenges. How are we planning to proceed? I think despite of all these challenges, on a national program on having this issues with this recurrence of Vivax and a very high number of cases, we need, and we want this change to happen. For this, we will be needing some policy change. Our policy change is mainly driven by WHO technical guidance. So we will be requiring support from WHO regional office, and of course the country office is there to help us, support us further. And there is a national technical working group forum in which we have to present this study, and along with this, the recommendations from WHO EMRO region, for which we will be having some technical guidance for the provinces. And of course, once it is endorsed and approved by the technical working group, then we need to update our treatment guidelines, and we need to look forward to support by Global Fund and other partners how to scale up these in our targeted districts. Just some of the challenges which I'm trying to highlight and document is that because we have already a non-compliance to PQ recommended dosage, in few areas the problem is more because of this G6PD testing deficiency not available there. So APMEN is already supporting us this year with the provision of G6PD analyzers for pilot study in 10 places. And we then have another big issue is non-availability of primaquine in local market due to non-availability of any WHO pre-qualified manufacturer. So I think this is another area where we already have DRAP. Again, APMEN is very kind enough to support the country. We have some good progress. I think our colleague Dr. Zishan will be talking more tomorrow in his session on Vivax elimination roadmap. So that's one of the challenge for the program to have primaquine available locally. We are fully dependent on Global Fund, WHO, UNICEF, and other partners for supply of primaquine. So this dependence has somehow to be overcome by availability of local primaquine in the local market once we decide about a wider use of primaquine. So these were few challenges which I wanted to share on the forum of this national program. Over to Dr. Manash. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hamad, for those specific challenges from Pakistan. Given that you've only highlighted logistic challenges, I believe you are technically open to the idea of universal radical cure, and maybe there could be future.
Thank you.
With that, we'd like to open the Q&A round, and I'm sure there will be lots of vibrant discussions in the Q&A round. And to handle that, I'd like to kindly invite Dr. Carey back to the floor. So Dr.
Thanks
Carey.
a million. And thank you to all the presenters. It's really interesting, and it's great to see the different innovations from different places coming out of research and also from different regions. We've had a lot of Q&A in the Q&A part of the Zoom, if you want to check those out. And I know that we're running over time, so I'll keep this relatively short. I will say, if any more questions do pop up, we'll be back online again tomorrow. So please do come back with any questions on reflection from today's sessions. I'll firstly, though, go to Elodie. There's one question that hasn't been answered in the Q&A, and that is from Dr. Soiti on the pediatric Primaquine tablets. So when will that formulation be at the market and deployed in the field to treat pediatrics?
So yeah, thank you so much, Carrie and Dr. Soiti, for this question. So as mentioned, the dossier will be submitted to WHO pre-qualification beginning of next year. And then for the countries which are eligible for global fund funding, we will have to wait for the pre-qualification of the drug. And so we expect the process to take approximately 1 year. So hopefully the drug should be available through the Global Fund in 2025. And in the meantime, in parallel, Faustino will also start submitting their dossier for registration to the malaria endemic countries in parallel. And this should also, I mean, it depends on the countries, but should take between 6 months to a year. So hopefully the drug will be available in 2025. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
Great, thanks a million. I'm going to just shoot a question to Kamala very quickly on the Primaquine universal radical cure. You've talked about PQ7 higher dose, but the WHO recommendation at the moment is for standard, and that's what a lot of countries are changing over to. So I just wanted to, and also we've heard about the PNG study on PQ 3.5 days. So I'd be interested to hear about your thoughts on other options for radical cure post the blood stage, or post PF treatment.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that question, Carrie. So, I mean, I think that the beauty of universal radical cure is that you can treat everybody with the same treatment. So in my view, there is not much point in using a different radical cure regimen for your PF patients compared to your PV patients. So I think having that universal in the sense of having a streamlined policy makes sense. So I would argue that whatever the current policy is for radical cure for Vivax should be used for falciparum as well. In that study, we used what we think is the best option, what we currently have in terms of radical cure, both from an efficacy as well as from an adherence point of view. But of course, if a country decides to go for tafenoquine, that could be used as well. Or if they are at a low dose 7-day regimen, that could potentially be used as well. So I think that in that study, we used what we think, as I said, is the best option, but that doesn't mean that other treatment regimens couldn't be used for that indication.
Great, thanks a million. Again, I'm aware of time. There are some questions in the chat. I'm just going to summarize them briefly. Ari Satyagraha asked about the G6PD intermediate males in the TRUST study who were treated with tafenoquine and whether they experienced adverse events. And the answer there is, I think, I haven't seen if we answered that actually. So I'm going to ask if...
Yes, we did, Carrie. So there was no ASA in those patients. So no acute hemolytic anemia or severe adverse events. Great,
thank you. We had a question on the relatively large proportion of G6PD intermediate males in the Thai study from Kamala. Penny has answered that. We are actually just in live contact with the DVBD team while they're on the road. So the response from Penny's is that actually reduced down in the second phase. We think that was due to venous blood draw and the delay between that draw and the testing, but it has reduced down. Ari, you've asked how long was the delay? We'll try and come back to you on that. So we've answered the question on the pediatric formulation of Primaquine, and Dr. Zui in Myanmar is asking about the frequency of tafenoquine chemoprophylaxis from Tom. Thanks for your response there. For that study, it would be given monthly over 3 months. And finally, from Dr. Anmol, any evidence of cross-resistance to TQ with other first-line drugs? And Elodie, thanks for that response. There's no cross-resistance that we know of to other first-line drugs. So with that, I know that's been a relatively short Q&A, given the diversity and the richness of the presentations that were given. We will have some opportunity to discuss further tomorrow. So if there are additional questions, please do come back with those on reflection. And we will be providing these presentations where we've been given permission to everyone. And I'll just hand back to Manash then to close up the meeting today, with thanks to everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Carey. On behalf of the APMEN Vivax Working Group, I'd like to thank all the speakers and all the participants for making this day one of our virtual update of a highly successful one. I'm sure you'll tune back tomorrow at the same time for day two, as today we had a very quick but a snapshot of the latest emerging evidences and experiences in Vivax malaria. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about implementation and how that looks like. So hopefully we'll get to see all of you tomorrow at the same time. And it's a miracle that we've only gone 20 minutes of our times today. So that is actually a milestone in this kind of virtual meetings. So tomorrow we hope to make it dot on time. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely day.
Great. Thanks a million to everybody. Thanks for your participation.